Hey guys, it's Will Chandler here, Guardian Fury. It's kind of late and made a couple videos already today, but I wanted to um, just talk about my birth father for a few minutes. A couple of people have asked me to clarify my relationship with my birth father and when I was able to go back to um, living with him, how he got back involved in my life. And as I mentioned before, he. Come on, Hershey. Sorry about that, dog. I don't want the dog waking the wife up. Um, as I mentioned before, my mother took us, my sister and I, and ran. And with the help of the Jehovah's Witness cult, was able to keep us away from our real father for most of growing up. Um, Shortly after my mother left with us, my father actually did contact the headquarters in New York for Jehovah's Witnesses at the time down there in Brooklyn. And this was after he had come from Virginia up to Maine a couple times and for visitation, legally allowed visitation, and we wouldn't be there. So this poor man is only getting to see his kids for a couple weeks a year. Realizes that his kids are growing up in a cult. Um, there's almost nothing he can do. It's between a rock and a hard place. Um, he ends up calling the world headquarters to ask them for help to just be able to see his kids because he didn't understand how complicit that the elders and above were in making sure that Jehovah's Witness children would be fully indoctrinated into the cult and that the worldly parent would be pushed out if at all possible. Kind of like one of those birds that pushes out the original eggs in the nest and lays its own and tries to supplant and get rid of the worldly parent. Sorry, that analogy kind of was in my head for half a second and then left. Someone needs to watch Animal Planet for me, and you can figure out the rest of that analogy. But it is late. It's like past midnight. I just got done feeding the baby rabbits, and it's a lot of work keeping them things alive. But anyway, so my father contacts the world headquarters looking for help just to be able to see us 2 weeks a year, hoping that they'll tell her or help somehow, and that way he doesn't go from Virginia to Maine and then show up and we're not there. Of course, after that phone call, he realized he would never get help because it was pretty obvious to him right away that it went all the way to the top. And of course, I've already discussed the child custody pamphlet that my mother did use to help keep get full custody of my sister and of me through lying to the courts. And so there were a few times growing up where he kind of had the law put their foot down, and we were able to see him. Now, building up to it, as I've said before, it was hell because there was just being pounded in my head that this man was evil, that my stepmother was evil, that they hated us, that they wanted to kill us, they were going to die at Armageddon, that they were in league with the devil. All this, I mean, as I remember this from the first time as being as young as 5, 6 years old. this was being pounded into my head. And so then I had to go hang out with this guy for a week or two, right? So I'm completely confused and scared and cognitive dissonance at an early age, because if this guy is so evil, why in the hell are you allowing me to go spend time with him? But then I would get around him, and it was obvious fairly quickly that the stuff they said wasn't true. I've talked about some of that before, that, you know, I'll be crying on the phone and telling them he's not like that, and my stepmother, she's not like that, that they do love me, they don't. And I mean, I'd be crying and bawling my eyes out. There was one time growing up that my father did get visitation for us, and we were able to come down to his place in Virginia for 2 weeks. And he and my stepmother both said never again, because every single night they were having to deal with seeing me crying and sobbing because of what I was being told they were like on the phone. Because, of course, we had to call the Jehovah's Witness rapist and my Jehovah's Witness mother every night. And so he said never again, because he couldn't bear to put me through that. And being a parent now, I can understand that. Now, when I was 12, we moved down to Texas from Maine. For the 3 years that we were in Texas, my father and stepmother did not come to see us, and there had been added pressure and pushback. Kind of the brainwashing kind of kicking in, and as far as they were trying to paint him as evil, and instead of pushing back, he kind of took a step back a little bit and let things work themselves out a little bit. He read it well. He did a good job. It was, what he did was proper. I can't imagine having to make that decision, but in the long run, it was the right thing, because it helped us to see what was really going on. At least it helped me to see what was really going on, and that he wasn't who they said. Even though it was hard for me, you know, it was many months of living with him until I realized fully the extent to which my mother had lied to me, and that how much my Jehovah's Witness stepfather had lied to me about my true father, my real father, my worldly father. You know, the empty can rattles the most, and boy, my mother and my stepfather rattled a lot. When we moved back to Maine from Texas, when my mother finally left my rapist after 10 years of putting me through that, knowing who he was and what he was, and still making me go back to that for a couple years. When she finally woke up and protected her children, and we went back to Maine when I was 15. A while after that, almost a year until my father even knew where we were, my worldly father, my dad. And when he did find out, it was actually September of the next year. So we'd already been back in Maine almost a year. And then they came up, my father and stepmother came up for a visit, and I was able to see family in Down East Maine and New Harbor area that I hadn't seen in many years. And as I alluded to in my other video, that's when I saw my out, because my father was now back in the picture. I knew that the Jehovah's Witnesses was a false religion, and it was either go live on the streets or take a chance. Initially, I actually wanted to stay with my grandfather, because I still had a fear of my father because of the brainwashing. It was a severe cognitive dissonance where everything that I observed said he was great, but I'd been told he was evil for so long that it was actually my my grandfather and my grandfather's wife that helped convince me and kind of helped guide me to saying, okay, I'll go ahead and try living with my father and stepmother. And it was it was a good thing. I tell you what, it was a good thing. I'm very lucky that I had a situation where I was able to have an exit without having to go live on the streets. No. Yeah, it's late and the dog doesn't need to be barking. He just wants to play. It's a chocolate lab. Man, so I forget what I was just saying. There was one last point I wanted to make, and then the dog barked, and my brain went kaput. Um, Man, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it was, but so anyway, so yeah, my father's back in my life through that. I feel like I'm messing the rest of you up now. There was a couple of points, and I'm all off topic now. Um, oh, that's what it was. You know, and I didn't find out until a few months ago that my mother never told my father the abuse I'd gone through. She'd said that she alluded to some type of abusive stuff with my stepfather to my dad. But she didn't say anything about sexual abuse and all the other stuff. I I didn't realize that, like I said, until a couple months ago. Here I was, 16 years old. I was a mess because I realized, my whole world had come kind of fallen apart, and here I was as the Walking Dead, basically, and going to live with the man I'd been told was the devil my whole life. And so that was preferable to staying in the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses, though. That was the better deal. And can you imagine, though? Like, think of all the suicide rates and everything. The thought had crossed my mind. Like, I had struggled with a lot of crap, and now that my um, and all the stuff that my mother put me through, she's supposed to be my mother, should be protecting me, and I struggle with. I never was full on wanting to commit suicide, but the thought definitely crossed my mind, and I can't imagine not letting another parent know, especially my situation. Here I am going to something brand new, leaving behind everything I know, and my mother doesn't even tell my father the type of abuse I'd gone through. I'm 16 years old at this point. I might have looked like a man, but I was emotionally an infant. Like, I had been so messed up by the cult. Of course, my mother was the same, still completely messed up by the cult. And the thing with my mother, when she was in high school up in rural Maine, her teachers actually went to the University of Maine and got some arranged for my mother to go to University of Maine classes when she was in high school, because she was so smart that there was nothing the teachers, like all the teachers and the local high schools, couldn't teach her anything. And the whole old adage of there's a fine line between genius and insanity. And I tell you what, my mother jumped right over it. Like, she's a smart woman, but she's right off the deep end. If you first talk to her, she seems pretty normal, nice enough. But then the more you see her, the more you talk to her, the crazier it gets. Like, and it's just one inconsistency after another. Like, it's really mind-boggling. But that's the mind screw that the cult would do to you. And I mean, she crossed over that line. It's not a fine line anymore. It's dust way in her past, But Um, it's late. I'm tired. I'm not even sure if I answered all the questions about my father, but that's a little bit more of my background. And I'm gonna go to sleep now. So y'all have a good night. This is Will Chandler, handle of Guardian Fury. Take it easy.